Welcome to Job Tales, the podcast that brings you real stories from professionals across industries. Today, we dive into the world of supply chain management. Our guest shares insights on purchasing strategies, the key certifications in the field, and the unexpected soft skills that make a difference. We'll also explore who has the best chances of getting hired and how business intelligence and AI are shaping the future of supply chain. Dirk Jouret, welcome to the show. What is it that you do in supply chain management on a daily basis?
So, what do I do on a daily basis? I work on projects in supply chain. So my background is in operational supply chain in terms of purchasing, buying, inventory management, and so forth. But at the moment, I'm working on projects in supply chain where they're very much focused on business processes. So whether it is how in a company production orders are planned or how inventory is moved around in logistics from one plant or from a warehouse to the production site. So it's very IT centric and focused also on the ERP system in order to get let's say, the inventory to where it is needed and also to facilitate and streamline how people work with the focus on efficiency, which basically is the main goal of supply chain is to make sure that resources are optimized and that there's no waste going in terms of loss of product or having too much inventory and no disruptions in the commercial activity.
Okay, so that's good that you're mentioning this because I was going to ask to give me a definition of supply chain so that everyone is on the same page. And also, you mentioned ERP. Some might not know what ERP is, so please make that definition as well for me.
Sure, it's enterprise resource planning. There are different definitions of it, but that's what I would call it in terms of it. It's a very, let's say, supply chain is a coordination of enterprise resources,
Okay.
whether it be inventory or people or machines.
Okay. So that's also an important point. It's not just products that are being managed and coordinated, right? It's the overall experience in a company. Is that
Correct.
correct? Okay.
Yes. And also the financial impact of those decisions and of those business processes.
Okay. And what would you say would be the most impactful financial, say, consequences of a bad supply chain management?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is working capital. So if you have too much inventory, it's a drain on the financial resource of the company,
Yeah.
but doesn't necessarily give a better service to the customer. So it's focusing on the one hand of maintaining what we would call a service level agreement in the sense that we say, okay, if you want to, you're buying a product from a company, we want to make sure that it's always on stock, but not too much. The risk is either we have too much working capital or if, for example, a product line gets phased out, that you have what they would call dead inventory or things that have to then be thrown away. So basically it's a financial write-off for the company. So you have to make sure that you don't have too much or too little, because it
Or
could
too
be
little.
that you're below your service level agreement and that
Right.
there's no product available and your customers will go elsewhere and sometimes they don't come back.
Interesting and very important. So, how did you know that you wanted to work in this field? Because, and the indirect question to this is that when you were studying, did you know that such a job existed?
Not at all. I had no idea what I wanted to study, so I decided I was going to study business administration. I figured I wanted to be in business that has a high chance of paying rent, and that's
Okay,
where I went
it's a good
into.
start.
Yes, and so I ended up working in the agricultural commodity business.
Okay.
So for foodstuffs, so for human consumption. So it was vegetable oil, sugar, and other commodities that are consumed on a daily basis in the food chain. And at the time, I had never heard of supply chain other than it was a logistical function. But that has changed over the years. I had only met my first supply chain manager, I think maybe 10 years into my career.
Okay.
And then it really took off because of the impact that I described earlier in terms of its financial impact, in terms of its impact on the service level agreement that I mentioned, in terms of the cost of producing. So that's why they call it a supply chain, because it is connected to sales, it is connected to customer service, it's connected to finance, and also operations.
I see. So you studied business administration, saying, "Okay, something will happen, and I will find my way." Did you have to? So, what was your first job? In terms of responsibilities in the food industry.
Okay, I was a trader, so I was
Okay.
buying and selling raw materials
Okay.
as a
Trader. Okay.
as a supply to the food industry.
So your connection with supply chain, was it through this function that you had as a trader initially?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So ships were bringing in material from South America or the US into
Mm-hmm.
Europe, and I was working in France at the time. And so I was responsible for making sure that I was selling the materials to the companies that were consuming those raw materials.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to make sure that the ships, that was actually my first experience with the financial impact of supply chain. We had to make sure that there was enough storage in our facility to receive the ships.
Yeah.
And we had to make sure that planning was another important element that we had to have under control, that, the ships didn't come too soon or too late, because if they came too late, the factory could not function and would be out of stock. And the financial department would then remind me how much it would cost per day that a factory is not running. So those are my early lessons in supply chain.
So when you work in supply chain today, of course, the scenario has changed. You said that 10 years into your profession that you started to talk to some supply chain managers and look at this job. Now, if someone wants to apply as supply chain manager today, what would have to be his or her experience?
I would say, in terms of profile, someone that's analytical. So you have to understand what's going on and what will happen in terms of looking at possible scenarios. Take the example of the Suez Canal. All of a sudden, that was blocked. People got caught off guard, and
Yeah.
supply chains were disrupted. Or, for example, COVID.
Hmm.
What to do. So you have to be analytical. You have to be also thinking out strategies, what if scenarios. That was one of the things, the learnings I got from one of my first managers. It was,
Okay.
what if this happens? What if that happens? What are the contingency plans? Because things in supply chain are always changing.
Hmm.
There's always disruptions, whether they're political, whether it's weather, whether it's a boat stuck in the Suez Canal. So you have to be analytical, what if strategies. You have to be impulsive. One cannot one needs to make decisions quickly, and not all data is available to make those decisions. But you have to take calculated risks. So you have to be impulsive, take risks, but they have to be calculated.
Sounds quite a challenging job because you need to be one and the opposite at the same time, right? Calculating, but at the same time, enough spontaneous that you can then save the day in a way.
Absolutely.
Did you find some difficult times in your career where you had to make difficult choices and you didn't have all the elements?
On a daily basis.
Okay, great.
So, when everything runs well in supply chain, nobody notices. But
Yeah.
if things go wrong, people notice very quickly
Mm,
because it has consequences.
yeah.
And oftentimes there are multiple stakeholders. So, for example, if there's a disruption in the supply chain, I will have finance calling me, I'll have sales calling me, I'll have production calling me, because they all want to know at the same time, when will product be there, or when will the issue be resolved?
Hmm.
And I don't always have the answers. So oftentimes I have to tell them to wait.
Yeah. And today specifically, I don't know if you can mention some examples. You're working for the Swiss rail company. What is your, let's say, everyday life at the railway company?
No, well, it's because I'm working on projects. Oftentimes, I think the most important task I have for the day is to continuously plan my next actions, or ticking off, let's say, tasks that have been planned, keeping the pace of a project.
Hmm.
Also in project management, not necessarily specifically to supply chain, but there's always multiple stakeholders. There's always, let's say, delays somewhere. There's always unexpected hurdles. And so the importance is always to keep the pace going, always moving forward, incrementally and slowly, perhaps at sometimes, but always keep the focus on moving forward and making headway. So I would say a lot of my day is spent planning and also prioritizing. So I think this helps. My experience in supply chain has helped me also in project management,
Hmm.
where I have to reassess the situation continuously and say, okay, my priorities from yesterday are maybe not my priorities today or tomorrow. So always looking forward and saying, how can I reach my goal? Let's say overcome hurdles that I have. So a lot of it goes into planning on the one side in terms of my daily maintenance on project management.
Hmm.
And another part of the day is also working with stakeholders. I think one of the biggest hurdles I have in project management is the resistance to change. And
Hmm.
so a lot of time has to be spent in, I would say, lobbying stakeholders, reassuring them that the change is going to be positive, trying to help them see the positive sides of the change that's coming. And most people don't like change because it's equated with the unknown. What's going to
Yeah.
happen? What's
Yeah.
in it for me? And you have to build that trust. And the only way to build trust, I think, let's say a good way to build trust is to network and also meet people face to face. I think technology has helped us a lot in being able to do virtual meetings, online meetings, but the face to face physical presence, I think it shouldn't be underestimated that there is value in that, especially when building trust, when change is on topic.
Is on topic. Is it valid for many industries and many businesses? What you just said,
Yes,
the
yeah,
physical
across the board.
across the board.
Yeah.
Okay, so that means that a supply chain professional would have the opportunity to travel for work. Is that like a good part of your, let's say, job, or does it happen rarely? How do you see travel and then your everyday duties?
For my current position in Swiss Rail, it's a Swiss company and only operates in Switzerland.
Hmm.
There the travel is local, but and within Switzerland. So I do quite amount of travel to the different maintenance sites around the country, whether it's in the south in Ticino or in the west in Geneva or up north in Zurich or here in Bern. In my previous positions in supply chain, the travel was much more international. So that went cross continental, US, Asia, Middle East, Europe. So definitely supply chains are global today.
Hmm.
And so travel is part of the job.
You were mentioning software and tools. Is there today in the industry common software and tools that one would be required to know in order to fulfill their job?
Yes, it's much more important. Let's say it's much more prominent than it was when I started. I can't remember in any position I had that there was no project some having to do with ERP. So in most
Mm.
companies I've worked for, either they were upgrading their ERP or they were migrating their ERP to a different system. The gold standard, I don't work for SAP, but the gold standard is SAP,
Hmm.
maybe to a lesser extent also Oracle. But my experience working with big Fortune 500 companies, SAP is basically the standard. It is definitely a plus if you have it on your CV that you have experience with the top ERP programs. And also, in conjunction with that, experience in business intelligence. So, anyone that would have experience using Cognos or using Tableau, definitely a plus point because
Applies, okay.
the ERP systems are more and more integrated. So in order to extract data and turn it into information where you can use that to make decisions, some a supply chain manager who is autonomous and can use business intelligence has a definite advantage over his colleagues. Otherwise, you have to rely on, let's say, an IT department to do the extraction for you, or you can then customize it to your own liking. So that definitely improves efficiency and also the speed at which you can extract the information from the system.
So if you were to hire someone in the supply chain department, what would you be looking for in their CV? Making a statement there to to see, okay, there's someone junior, let's say, coming out of university. What kind of, first of all, degree would you like to see, and what kind of first experience would you expect to see?
I would have to think about that for a moment.
It's a tough one because I'm asking because I'm trying to put myself into the shoes of a young man or young woman who are interested in the job, and then they say, well, okay, but I don't have much experience. So maybe could a program on project management be helpful if I did a course on project management, or
Mhm.
maybe supply, are there supply chain management courses that can be done on top of maybe a university degree that I may have?
Yeah, so the supply chain positions have become much more specialized. For example, someone who is more oriented towards business processes and implementing, for example, a warehouse management system. So very more IT
Yeah.
and logistics. There are other positions that are more focused on inventory management, others more on cost reduction or purchasing, so purchasing strategies, things like that. The supply chain roles are, in my opinion, are becoming much more specialized. So I would suggest if someone decides I want to go into supply chain, I would shy away from doing a general business degree as I did.
Okay.
So in other words, if I would do it again, I would
Yeah.
get an APIX certification in supply chain. They have
Mm.
different certifications depending on the specialty that one wishes to go into, but that has a huge value because the tools and the models that can be implemented in a company and their supply chains have become so sophisticated now that they're quite complex.
Hmm.
So yeah, I would hire someone who had specific experience or a
A
certification
certificate.
in one aspect of supply chain through the APIX system. I would
Hmm.
say definitely that's a plus on
Okay.
a CV.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that's the only thing.
Hmm.
There's also soft skills that are required because of the change management aspect.
Change my, yeah, exactly. You mentioned a couple of those. Can you dive deeper a bit on those skills, the soft skills? I guess patience also, because we were mentioning, when change is affected, also we have to be patient and resilient, probably.
Yes, so resilience, yeah. So be prepared to have people, block your progress or your initiatives.
Mm.
So I think patience, but urgency. I think if an employee is too patient and wants to hear out all the stakeholders' fears and expectations and so forth, you don't make progress.
Okay.
So there needs to be a very good balance between patient to, let's say, influence and network and lobby the stakeholders, but on the other hand, also to get things moving forward.
Hmm. Good
So
point. Yeah.
yeah,
No. Excellent.
I think there's a good balance. There needs to be a good balance there. So I would say if I look at my perfect candidate, if they had an APIX certification, that's a big plus point.
Hmm.
If they maybe had some previous experience in sales,
Okay.
I think those are good people skills to
Hmm.
understand how to influence people, how to reassure them, how to communicate. Oftentimes, changes in supply chain are not understood by the final users or by the other departments.
Yeah.
And so, in order for the, let's say, the stakeholders to take ownership, they need to be, yeah, they need to understand what's coming, what change is coming and what the benefit is for them. So I think some experience in sales is good, although it may not be, let's say, self-evident to say, okay, someone from sales going into supply chain, but you sort of need to sell your ideas internally.
Internally, yeah, yeah. And which brings me maybe to a question: what are you most proud of? Looking back at your career.
Well, I have to say I'd be most proud of my daughter, but that's not part of my career.
Yeah, let's stick to the career part. But yeah, it's a great, it's a great answer.
Well, there's too many to choose from, but I would say my biggest achievement, the one that I'm most proud of, is when I was hired by a family-owned business here in Switzerland to basically they didn't have a supply chain department. And so I was hired in to create a supply chain department. So I brought together customer service, purchasing, planning, and also logistics and warehousing, brought
Okay.
them all together. I developed a supply chain strategy. But first of all, I looked at their maturity level. That's one of the models that you would learn, for example, in when you do an APIC certification, to understand where are they at, and then to build a roadmap and to take them on that journey and to say, okay, it's going to be step by step. There's going to be changes, organizational, physical, and also the way they do things. So I think my most proud accomplishment is actually building a supply chain organization and implementing a strategy, and also bringing in the tools that I learned from in other companies and bringing all that together. The result was that they reduced inventory. I don't recall the numbers, but they were overjoyed. On the one hand, to see that we reduced inventory but did not affect the service level to the customers. So it brought down cost, it brought down working capital, and in addition, they also had more visibility in terms of where their products were worldwide. This was a family-owned business that exported to Argentina, to Australia, to the US, worldwide.
Okay.
And they had an overall view of where their inventory levels were worldwide.
Fantastic.
So that's my most proud accomplishment.
I can confirm that you can be definitely proud of this. And one last question that is about the future. You mentioned business intelligence, and I'm thinking AI. How do you think AI is going to affect the supply chain?
I think it will have a big effect. Today, I think where we're at, and some companies have made inroads into it, where we're at now is we're still using, let's say, manual or we're using mathematical and formulas to do some forecasting, to crunch through some numbers, but it's still very much piloted by a person. I think many of these analyses that in some companies are done in Excel, other things already built into SAP or some customization. But I think where the future now comes in is that AI will do these, let's say, basic analyses and forecasting while we're sleeping at night. And then when we come into the office, then we can adjust and see what AI has suggested in terms of optimizing inventory levels, checking out safety stocks, and all these things that up to now have more or less been manual analyses that we've been doing. So I think it's going to have a big impact.
Thank you very much. And last question, the very, very last question is, what advice do you want to give to the young generation who's listening?
Advice in what terms?
In the sense of how to approach the job of a supply chain manager, and or in anything that can come to your mind.
Okay, well, I would say get some kind of specific training in supply chain, as I mentioned before. For example, APICS, but there are
Apex.
other
Okay.
certifications. So you have a professional toolkit that you can bring to the company. What is the value added between someone who has learned the tools that can be implemented quickly in supply chain versus someone that has a general business background? So I would say get specific tools and skills. Secondly, maybe a minor in finance, because at the end of the day, companies are supposed to make money, and that's the main driver. And third, I would say work on presentation skills. So anything that has to do with communication. So something that you can do very easily is sign up and with Toastmasters. I think, if you have the skills and the knowledge, that's fine, but you need to be able to convey it and also be able to influence people. And that you do through communication.
Excellent. That was Dirk Jouret, Supply Chain Project Manager. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget you can catch more on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm always on the lookout for inspiring guests, so if you have any ideas, drop me a line at jobtalespodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week for another episode of Job Tales.